Hi, I'm Bruce Schneier, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I am so excited. We have a major milestone this week. This is episode 400, 400, for October 28th, 2024. And I am really, honestly, having a hard time wrapping my head around this. I've been trying to stop and really think about what I've been doing here. And I got to say, I'm actually pretty amazed that I managed to do this for this long. Just looking back, episode 1 of this podcast, the very first time I aired an episode, the very first podcast I ever did was March 8th, 2017. Now, it was a very different show then, mostly because I was part of a network of shows that had a very, shall we say, dramatic tone, which was not really my vibe. But, you know, all credit to that experience. I mean, I would not have been able to launch this without that. They kind of brought an audience with them, and so that really got my foot in the door. But it didn't take me too long to figure out that still just was not my thing. And so I went out on my own right around episode 100, just before then, actually. And episode 100 was the first time I interviewed Bruce Schneier, who is, of course, my guest today. And, just a little history. I'd been bugging him for probably a good year and sending him emails and saying, hey, I'd love you to come on my show. And he would always say he's too busy and or something like that. And so finally I'm like, Bruce, okay, I'm going to try one more time. This is my 100th episode. I would love to have you on to help me celebrate this milestone. And he said yes. And that has now started this tradition where he comes back for every 100th episode. This is the 4th time I've had Bruce on the show, this being the 400th episode. So if you'll indulge me just a second, before we get into the interview, 400 episodes is a truly noteworthy milestone. And, I could not imagine that I would still be producing a podcast every single week on my own for nearly 8 straight years. But, the truth is I would not still be doing it if I didn't love doing it. And I do. I particularly love doing these interviews because I get to talk to some really amazing people. But I want to just take a moment to say thank you, a heartfelt thank you to all of my listeners and everyone who has supported me over all these years, particularly my family and certainly all of my patrons. So I just want to take a moment to really celebrate the hell out of this significant achievement. I don't think we do this enough. I know I don't personally do this enough to stop and take time and appreciate my personal accomplishments. And so if you'd like to help me celebrate this major milestone, and perhaps maybe along the way, help me to reach and help even more people, share this episode or maybe some past favorite episode on social media. That's a great way to reach a lot of people in a short period of time. If you do, please use the hashtag FDSD400. But also, if you can, @mention me, so I'll be sure to like and repost it. If you go to fdsd.me, that's my personal URL shortening service. If you go to fdsd.me/contact, you can find all my social media handles there. And by the way, if you're not on social media, first of all, you have my admiration. But second of all, there's a lot of other fun ways you can help me spread the word. So if you are interested in doing that, check out the support page off my website, firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. Okay, thank you for indulging me. I just wanted to take that time to acknowledge this. So we have a great interview for you today. Bruce Schneier is a really fun guy to talk to. He's got a lot of interesting background and experience. The guy literally wrote the book on cryptography, which I'm happy to say I have a signed copy of. I do like collecting signed copies of books. Anyway, Bruce he's just a very interesting person, and we're going to talk about kind of a wide variety of things today. In the past, I had maybe a focused topic, but there's been a lot of things happening in the news, certainly since the last time I had him on the show, but also just, over the summer with the CrowdStrike attack and the thing with the Telegram CEO being arrested and the pager bombings, and there's been a lot of stuff going on. And then we've got this big U.S. election just right around the corner, and election security is a big topic. So I had a lot of questions I want to ask him. We're going to get into a lot of that stuff today. Really quick, before we get to the interview, I do, as I usually do, want to kind of rattle off some of the lingo that we, talk about and don't really stop to define. He talks about the shadow brokers. That was a hacker group that exposed a bunch of exploits and hacking tools, widely assumed to have been leaked from the NSA. That was back, I think, in 2016. So when he talks about the shadow brokers, that's what he's talking about. We briefly mentioned this thing called the vulnerabilities equities process. That's a fancy term for a government process. I think this came out during the Obama years, but I could be wrong. Anyway, but it's a process that we use to evaluate these bugs, these zero-day bugs that we find in software that, for instance, maybe the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, one of our government agencies discovers and tries to decide whether it's better to disclose and fix them or keep them secret so we can exploit them. And that is a controversial topic, and that is another question that I'm going to be asking Bruce about today. And then finally, he works at a company called Inrupt with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is the inventor of the World Wide Web. And part of what they're working on is, I guess, what you might call data sovereignty. They're basically trying to find ways for you to gain more control over your data and share it with companies or whoever that you want to, and be able to edit and review and revoke those permissions as you see fit. And that will come up a little bit at the end of the interview, so I just wanted to give you a little more context there. But hey, let's get to the interview. That's a lot more fun. Here for my 400th podcast episode, and the fourth time back on the show, Bruce Schneier. Bruce Schneier is an internationally renowned technologist and security guru. He's the author of over a dozen books, including his latest, A Hacker's Mind, and my personal favorite, Data and Goliath. He's testified before Congress. He's served on several governmental committees and corporate boards. He's written many, many seminal papers and a very popular blog called Cryptogam. And last but not least, he's the chief security architect at Inrupt. Welcome back to the show for the big 400th episode. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Seems like we have a tradition going on.
We do. And you probably didn't think it'd go this long. You probably didn't think you'd be roped into this many.
I didn't think this would survive this long. Who knew that podcasts are still a thing?
Yeah, that's true. So I thought today we'd just kind of do a little potpourri, a little bit of mishmash of current events, and talk about and kind of weave those in with some recent essays you've written. And I want to start with CrowdStrike. That failure caused massive outages and, of course, spawned several lawsuits. And there's a lot of focus, of course, on the specific cause of that CrowdStrike failure, rolling out a bad data file to everybody all at once globally. Turns out that's not a good thing to do. But what are the bigger lessons we really should take from this incident? And also, CrowdStrike took a lot of heat for this, but doesn't Microsoft deserve some blame here too?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And this was not an attack, right? This was an error. This was a faulty update that, because CrowdStrike had access to the Microsoft operating system at a very deep level, which they needed to do their stuff, bricked the entire computer.
Right.
And, there's a lot of blame to go around. I mean, certainly this update was obviously bad, and I can't imagine the lack of testing that happened. I mean, we don't know the details, and I think it's really important to state. And yes, there are lawsuits, and maybe details will come out there. There have been lots of articles, but we don't really understand what the failure was in the testing that let CrowdStrike send out this update to everybody and not to like 30 people and see how it goes, and 1,000 see how it goes, and a rolled update.
Right.
And a lot's been written about Microsoft giving kernel access.
Yes.
To companies like CrowdStrike, and they blame it on the European regulators, which is kind of interesting. What they say is the regulators told us that we can't give our own people better access than we give others. Therefore, we had to give others the same level of access we give our own engineers, which I mean, yes, is true, but doesn't answer the question of like, why does anybody get that level of access? And there's certainly better ways for Microsoft to design its OS where this couldn't have been done by anybody, CrowdStrike or an internal Microsoft failure.
Well, and they've done this over the years, right? Microsoft had, like, for the longest time, had direct kernel access, Ring 0, whatever, for like video drivers and things like that, which they've nerfed over the years to prevent things like this from happening, right?
Because it's dangerous. Yeah. Because giving people, engineers, companies that level of access is fragile, is risky. But they still did it in this case. Why? We don't know. It's hard to figure out. I lay a lot of the blame on our late stage capitalism, on the system where we're building all of these networks to be as fragile as possible. Where does why do companies rely on these third party systems so much that if they go down, the entire airline goes down for 3 days?
Right.
Again, we don't know what the alternatives are, and there's a lot here, but we've built a system where we do things as cheaply as possible because near term that is the most profitable, and then you get these long term risks. So how this all intersects is very complicated, and my hope is that in these lawsuits we'll learn a lot more. I mean, really, what we're learning is just the press releases of the companies, which is very little.
Mm-hmm.
So everything I'm saying could be like wrong, and we'll find out. It's going to be hard. I don't know how the lawsuits work, but I'm sure the CrowdStrike had a license agreement, which, well, like all license agreements, says we have no liability if our stuff goes bad.
Right.
So, how do you deal with that? I don't know. I mean, I'm not an attorney here, and they're figuring it out. But while there's been a lot of talk of lawsuits, I don't know if there have been any yet.
Oh, I think some of them have filed. I mean, they'll take forever.
Okay.
They'll take years.
So that says you know more than I do.
Yeah.
And it'd be really interesting just to read those and see what the details are.
So you actually said this in a recent one of your essays. You said the security basically isn't profitable, that companies are kind of making the cost-benefit analysis that security by design is too expensive, so why do that? We'll pay for it after the fact when the failures inevitably occur. It's more robust to be brittle. I think you used the term brittle. So how did we get to this point? And maybe more importantly, how do we fix this? Is it because there's no liability for software like there is for like cars or food?
I do blame liability a lot. So let's think of this CrowdStrike story as an example. I mean, CrowdStrike could have spent more money on engineering. They could have spent more money on testing. They could have spent more money on resilience. Microsoft could have spent more money on designing their systems so they didn't have to give companies like CrowdStrike that level of access. All the customers of these products could have designed their systems to be less vulnerable to single points of failure. All of that could have happened. All of that costs money. And that is money you are not rewarded for spending.
So is that the crux of the issue? Because there is it's the financial liability. There's no downside to not doing it?
That is correct, right? Because, look at the stock price of CrowdStrike, and I think it's largely recovered.
Yeah.
So yes, there's little downside to taking the risk, and that's the problem.
And is regulation the only way to fix that? I mean,
the market can't fix
right,
it.
Yeah.
Right. The market is rewarding
right.
this risky behavior. And if you think about it from the point of view of the manager, right, they're getting rewarded on keeping costs down. They're not getting rewarded on reducing risk. Right? They look at the system and say, well, I'm going to roll a die and maybe I'll get lucky. And if I get lucky, I win. And if I get unlucky, or I get unlucky, I'll get another job. So the correct betting strategy is to take the risk. So if the market can't fix this, if this is a market failure, and there are lots of market failures, the way you fix it is through things that aren't the market. And that's government, right? You want cars that don't explode when they crash. You want pajamas that don't catch on fire. You want pharmaceuticals that won't kill you long term. You don't turn to the market. You turn to regulation. And in the U.S. we don't do that. That is not something we think about. That is not something we plan. But that is truly the right way to do it.
Well, I mean, a lot of people say we have way too many regulations, and it's hurting innovation and things like that. We do have
but that's bullshit. I mean, yes, innovation in cars, cars that kill you, and pharmaceuticals that are unsafe. The notion that regulation hurts innovation is what you're told by people who don't want you to regulate.
Yeah,
regulation spurs innovation. You go to the RSA conference, you see there's an entire floor full of good security products that nobody is buying because there's no regulations telling them they need to be secure. What regulation does is it enhances innovation. It does not harm innovation. We don't have any problems with innovation in pharmaceuticals because it's heavily regulated. You don't see no restaurants in town because the health codes are so onerous.
Right.
The notion that regulation hurts innovation is a lie. It has never been true, and we are all primed to believe it's true by companies who don't want to regulate and would rather shove the risk onto customers and keep the extra profits for themselves. I don't buy it, and I don't think you should either.
Well, and look at all the things that have happened just in the car industry with like pollution and safety. There's been a lot of regulations that they screamed about for years, and yet now we've got hyper efficient cars that are much safer than they used to be.
And of course they scream, because that's their job. You just have to stop listening.
Yeah. In 2014, probably in the wake of the Snowden revelations, I don't forget exactly how this played out, but President Obama issued some sort of guidance to the NSA that they should favor releasing zero-day exploits over hoarding them. Where are we at today on this? Do you think that the U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies are currently striking the right balance between offense and defense? Are they, if you were writing this policy today, how would you phrase it or change it?
It's a hard question because we have no idea. Maybe all of this is classified. All of this is happening behind closed doors. We're not privy to any of these decisions. The NSA claims that they release, some large percentage of vulnerabilities they discover. That number is a little bit squirrely because they don't differentiate between vulnerabilities they can exploit and ones they can't. We know a bunch from the shadow brokers, the vulnerabilities that were found in that data dump that Microsoft hoarded. But even that story's 6 years, 7 years old now? I don't think we have any idea. And the fact that this is done in secret, I think, is a little bit disturbing. But yes, I haven't thought about this question in a while. Thinking about it now, I don't even know how to answer it because we are not told.
Whenever it comes to national security and things like that, it gets really tough because I am in favor of transparency, but I understand the need that these organizations need, there's some secrecy involved in this. And yet for a democracy to work, the citizenry have to be informed so I can elect people that will implement policies that make sense. But I can't do that if I don't know what's going on. Like the FISA court thing. I mean, that bothers me too, that there's just no transparency there. And I don't feel like as a citizen, my needs and desires and freedoms and rights are being represented for myself because I have no way of knowing.
This is hard, right? Because in a democracy, we expect the citizens to be informed. And, we are supposed to basically decide policy. We do it through our representatives. We do it through, the whole democratic process. But if there are facts that we are not allowed to know, then we can't effectively, adequately create policies.
Right.
So yes, I mean, this is a problem. The whole notion of government secrecy flies in the face of democracy. And, yes, there are legitimate reasons. I mean, there are legitimate secrets out there. What we seem to know when we see a lot of these secrets is that primarily they're secret because they're embarrassing, not because they should be secret.
Right.
But, again, before the fact, we don't know which are which, and we can't decide. So I share your skepticism. And I think the balance is being struck much too far on the side of excessive secrecy. The amount of things we classify are enormous.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And then when we see a lot of them, we look at it and say, why was this classified?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it would embarrass somebody if it was out. So we classify too much. We classified it for too long. If they were secret for 6 months, a year, 2 years, even that would be different.
Yeah.
Because that means you would be able to tell at the end of, a congressional cycle, what actually happened. And then you can, either reward the bums or throw the bums out, depending on what you thought. That would work. But a classification for 20, 30, 40 years doesn't make a lot of sense either. I don't know. I mean, the people I know who have access to the classified data kind of uniformly think that we are overclassifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's telling.
So do you have any insight on whether these same people are I asked you this question specifically because I thought you may have some leads on this. Do we know how many of these 0 days they sit on versus report, or they
We
sit
have
on for
no idea.
Yeah.
We have no idea. Like 110, 100, 1,000, we have no idea. It really is that opaque. If we saw the list of 0 days that they disclosed, and I think a lot of disclosures, they call the company and say, "Psst, by the way, you've got this, fix it."
Mm-hmm.
They don't make a big announcement. There was a while when the NSA was giving press releases like security companies do when they find and report 0 days. Right? Companies do it for the PR, and the NSA was getting the same kind of PR. That seems to have gone away. It was Ann Neuenberger who was, I think, leading that, and then she moved to the White House. So maybe the new person didn't prioritize that as much. But even then, it's not what they disclose, it's what they don't disclose. And we don't even know like how many 0 days go through that equities process that we saw the details about in maybe 2014.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know how many. We don't know how many 0 days are controlled by contractors that don't go through that process. Right? If you are a defense contractor, you're going to have one. I don't think it goes through that process.
Right.
There's a lot opaque here. And, like I get there's a legitimate reason to have these capabilities. There's a proposal a bunch of years ago from Steve Bellovin, and I forget his co-author here, where he suggested that basically all 0 days should be disclosed to the vendors and that the NSA gets to use them in the month or two before they're fixed. So basically, it requires the NSA to find a continuous stream of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's unreasonable. There probably are a continuous stream of them. It does give them the ability to use them. And it also means they all get patched, right? They all eventually improve our security.
If you were president of the United States and you were writing that executive order, would that be along the lines of what you would?
I'd start there. But again, there's so much I don't know about this process that I couldn't tell you what the answer is because I only have like 1/10 of the facts. And that's the problem in this discussion, that we just know so little.
Yeah.
And I can make pronouncements, yes, we should do this, but until I know the facts, I wouldn't recommend a policy. And here's the worst part. I get into the White House, right? I get into the administration, I get the facts, I recommend a policy. Now I can't justify it to you because
Right.
all those facts are secret.
Right.
So how did that help?
What about the open market for 0 days? What about companies like Zerodium and some of these that are other companies that are buying up 0 days and probably, we have to assume selling them out the back door to maybe NSO Group or wherever, right? What should that be allowed? And I know the government's kind of come down on it a little bit, but should we allow for a public market in 0 days like that?
I don't think it's great. I'm not sure how we can prevent it. Dan Geer suggested over a decade ago that the U.S. just buy everything.
Mm-hmm.
Buy everything and publish it.
Yeah.
We're going to destroy the market by owning it. We will, whatever you bid, Zerodium, we're going to outbid you.
Yeah.
And basically, I think what he wrote is, this is the cheapest win we're ever going to get. Really interesting idea. Because if you destroy the market, right, then suddenly these cyber weapons arms manufacturers can't exist. And you make yourself a lot safer.
Yeah.
But to do that, you have to, destroy the market. You make the price so high that Zerodium can't afford them. Right? They buy one, they go out of business. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. It does incent all of these private actors to find vulnerabilities because they can sell them, but that's okay. We all get safer because of that. A lot of this conversation hinges on an interesting question that I don't know if we know the answer to. And it's this: are exploitable vulnerabilities rare or plentiful? So in Microsoft Windows, I'm just going to make this up.
Mm-hmm.
Are there 10 or are there 10,000? If there are 10 and I buy 3 and fix them, I've made the OS much safer. If there are 10,000 and I buy 3 and fix them, nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many are there? What does this ecosystem look like? I remember, wow, Eric Rescorla decades ago tried to answer this question. So none of these are new questions, right? None of these are new issues. And the fact that we've gotten closer to solving them,
Yeah.
while at the same time,
Yeah.
the IoT, AI, I mean, so many things are making us more vulnerable, I think is really important. I believe that for our security, this offense-defense balance really needs to be resolved on the side of defense. Like we are too vulnerable
Yeah.
to hoard 0 days. That yes, we can use them for offense, but they can be used against us. That we need to adopt a defense dominant strategy where the defense wins with the recognition that that makes us safer.
Yeah.
It's not because we don't like offense.
Right.
It's because if everybody's punching each other, we get hit the hardest.
Right.
Right. If everybody's defending, we do better.
Yeah.
Because
we all do better.
like our world is so dependent on these systems, especially now that they're part of infrastructure. And the CrowdStrike is an example of that. I mean, who would have guessed beforehand if I asked you, see this product over here, this little obscure thing? If it went down, would Delta Airlines not be flying for 3 days? You would have said, "Don't be ridiculous. What are you talking about? That's dumb." I mean, these dependencies are hidden and critical. We just don't have resilience built into our systems. Again, getting back to the motivations of companies and capitalism, and the market that rewards this brittleness, this just-in-time and brittleness. The dependencies are so complicated and deep that it doesn't make sense to risk our security in that regard.
Well, we'll definitely we'll come back to the supply chain stuff in a minute because that's definitely something I want to talk about too. But with the big U.S. election coming up just around the corner, I'd be remiss if I didn't, take this opportunity to ask you what you think the current state of election security is, and I don't just mean like the actual level of security, but I'm also curious to what your take is on the perceived level of security. Because I mean, Chris Krebs back in 2020 said the election was, quote, the most secure in American history, unquote, and was summarily fired. But besides that, 35% of Americans still believe it was fraudulent. And that's not good for democracy. So first of all, how vulnerable do you think we are currently? Have we made some improvements? And then what can we do to engender greater trust in the outcomes?
Funny, they're separate questions. And this was hard for us security people to walk in 2020, where on the one hand, we're saying that our election systems are incredibly vulnerable to attack. That the computerization, the networkization of these systems make them very vulnerable. Yet at the same time, there was no evidence that the 2020 election was hacked in a significant way.
Matt Blaze was at DEF CON. He had that exact slide. He said there are two unsatisfying realities. He said there's serious vulnerabilities, but we have no evidence that they've been exploited.
Right. And that was really hard to say because you get on television and you say half of that and everyone stops listening.
Right.
So
right.
That's difficult. And we don't want the fact that we got lucky to take away from the systemic vulnerabilities going forward, but we don't want the systemic vulnerabilities going forward to take away from the fact that we got lucky. Have we gotten better? It's hard to tell. My feeling is probably not. A couple of things. My feeling is probably not that there are civic vulnerabilities still in the systems. Less in the voting machines and more in the systems that surround them. So I think about the registration process. The process by which when you go to the polls, they determine that you're eligible to vote. The tabulation process, the reporting process. Right? Though, when I think about election security, I'm teaching a class on that at Harvard Kennedy School in a couple of weeks. I think of it from getting from voter intent to the final tally. Right? So that whole process. So registering to vote, getting a ballot, getting it filled out, getting it counted properly, getting that count into the sum, getting the sum into other sums, getting the final total, and then reporting that out. That's the process that I'm looking at. And there are lots of vulnerabilities there that don't affect the machines. The both good and bad reality is, unlike Canada, Japan, Australia, France, most countries, US elections are controlled locally. Right? We don't have Elections Canada, for example, the
Right.
national organization in charge of free and fair elections. We have nothing like that. So that means subverting the US election requires subverting lots of little systems,
Right.
and you tend not to know which ones are going to be critical. I mean, you have some idea,
Swing states.
which of 7 states
Yeah.
it'll be. But on the other hand, right, an election official in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania versus the Russian military is not a fair fight.
Right.
So the threats are global, but as the United States FEC, Fair Election Commission, they can't go into a state and dictate rules. The states won't let them.
Can't we set a floor? I mean, that's what's. I mean, why not just
Who's the we in your sentence?
the federal government? The federal. Can't
In
we
a
say
lot
that
of
there has to be
cases,
paper
no.
ballots and risk limiting
A
audits?
lot of cases, no. There's very little we can do because the elections are fundamentally run by the states. They're not run by the federal government. And that's been a problem. I mean, ideally, this election security system we have is designed for the threats of, the early 1800s, basically. And our security is someone from your party, someone from my party is going to stand in the room, and we're going to watch each other. We're going to make sure nobody pulls anything funny. And that was great security for the early 1800s. It is completely useless security for 2024. But it's what we have. And changing it is so political. And this definitely gives our enemies an advantage.
Yeah.
Another problem I think about a lot is that we don't have any system for do-over. Right? So if your credit card gets hacked, you know what you do. You call your bank and you argue about it, and maybe it takes a while, but you probably get your money refunded. Right? We have systems that deal with problems by rolling back the fraudulent transactions. We have no such system for elections. Right? Imagine we go to the polls and on election day, Pennsylvania finds that its voting rolls don't work. They've been taken offline. No one knows how. Pennsylvania can't vote. Everyone gets a provisional ballot. We don't know how to do this. We can't say, okay, hold, we're going to do this again in a week. Right?
Yeah.
Or even worse, Pennsylvania does vote, and at the end of the day, someone gives credible evidence that all the machines have been hacked.
Right.
We don't have we're going to do it over. We don't have we're going to fix it and come back to you. So there's no real system of resilience.
Well, isn't that where voter verifiable ballots and risk limiting audits come in?
If you have those.
Yeah.
But if you don't, then you can't do anything. So there's a lot of fragility because, as much as people want a fair election before the event, after the event, they want their person to win.
Right.
And so, that's different than your bank. There's no constituency who's in favoring, let's let the fraudsters keep the money. Right? There isn't a lobbying group for that. Everyone's going to want,
right.
Let's make this right.
Yeah.
The second question you ask, I think, is completely separate, and that's trust in the election.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I don't think that's anything I can do. Right? That's not a technical question. That is not a problem of machines and accuracy and audit and paper ballots. That is just a partisan belief in what I think is right versus true. I don't think there's anything that could be done to convince some of these people that the result they disagree with actually happened. And no amount of math can fix that.
No, but I would
I
hope
mean,
that
if I ca-
evidence, if I could show you that we've had, hand count paper ballots.
yeah, but your evidence is lying. I mean, yes, assuming the recipient believes in evidence,
Oh, right. Yeah.
believes in evidence that doesn't agree, they don't agree with.
Well,
I mean,
that's a deeper issue.
at a very basic level, democracy does two things, and you've hit upon them. The first one is to choose the winner, right? And the second one is what we're talking about, to convince the loser.
Yeah.
Right? Democracy has to do both. If it does just one, it hasn't succeeded. I don't know what it takes to convince people who are just not believing. When 2020, when Fox News calls the election for Biden, the people who didn't believe it didn't say, "Oh, I guess Fox News said it must be true." They turned off Fox News and went to an even more partisan news site that told them the reality they wanted to hear. Right? This isn't a problem that I can solve with better math.
Right.
I mean, I wish I could, right? I would do it.
Right.
But that's not a math problem.
Okay, let's move on. I'm curious what your take on this is. Pavel Durov, the CEO of Telegram, was arrested in France not that long ago, and it seems to have had the desired effect. I mean, Telegram has since said that they will be more forthcoming on handling user info, handing over the stuff to the law enforcement. So, first of all, what's your take on Telegram and the implications of arresting CEOs to get concessions? And B, didn't this all just show that Telegram does have this information to give in the first place, unlike, say, Signal?
So I'll do the second one first. Yeah, I mean, Telegram is not really an encrypted app. Right. It's that they say they are, but they're basically not. You can encrypt point-to-point conversations, not group conversations. It is really hard to do. Matthew Green wrote a really good blog post about this, and all listeners should go and read it.
Yeah, I covered it on the show actually. Yep.
Good. Yeah. So right, they are not an encrypted app. They pretend to be, but they are not. So that's the first thing. So yes, the fact that Telegram acquiesced proves that, but we knew it already. But their marketing was otherwise. The second question is, I think, a more interesting one. Should countries be allowed to fine, jail, penalize company executives who do things they don't like or against their law? So other example is Brazil, which has, I believe, temporarily jailed a Facebook employee for some reason, or maybe Twitter.
I think it was Twitter, yeah.
Yeah. So there have been examples of this. In general, I think countries should be allowed to enforce their laws. And I don't think companies should be allowed to flout laws with impunity. So in general, I am good with countries saying to companies, like, this is our law. If you don't follow it, we're going to arrest you, because that's what we do with people who don't follow laws. Haven't you been paying attention? Right? I'm in favor of governments beating markets here. Problem now is, of course, that these aren't all good countries that are doing this. Mm-hmm. You'll have totalitarian countries doing this, right? You'll have governments of Russia, you have China, you'll have other, but Brazil is nominally a democracy. France is definitely a democracy. These countries get to write their laws, and companies have to follow them. And I don't like companies that have more power than governments. So my sympathies lie with the government of France here, but really I don't want companies trying to wield this international power. I mean, we have seen some of the large tech monopolies flout regulations of smaller countries, saying, "Well, what are you going to do to us? Like, you have no hold on us, bah."
Well, and some of those countries actually require that you have offices in the country, so they have people to arrest on site if they need to have.
Kind of an odd job to have. It's like being the king's taster.
Right.
Okay, your job is to be in the office in France, and if they arrest you, don't run away too fast.
Yeah.
It's probably not in the job description. It might be in the job description. It's a tough job, but I suppose if it pays well, it's okay.
All right, let's move on. we still seem to be fighting the crypto wars. Governments are still trying to require some sort of privileged access to our communications, in order to fight CSAM and terrorism, these horrible things that are real things. But it seems like maybe the solutions now are maybe shifting more toward on-device scanning, sidestepping the issue. Maybe they're finally learning of trying to backdoor end-to-end encryption itself. So where are we now? I mean, given that this all started in the 90s, where do you think we are with the crypto wars? And have you or your colleagues come up with any viable privacy respecting technical solution that might appease politicians and law enforcement agencies?
No, because it's fundamentally the solution is anti-privacy and dangerous. And this gets back to the previous conversation we had on defense dominant strategy, but we'll get back to that. What I see is the tactics change, but the basic argument is the same, right? We want to read your stuff, and we want you companies to break all your security so we can read the stuff. And security people say, well, if you do that, then everybody can read the stuff, and that's really bad. And the government says, no, we don't care. Now, right, in the 90s, it had to do with phones. The 90s was the Clipper chip.
Yeah.
And this is like, 25th anniversary of the Clipper chip? 30th? What is it? Clipper chip was 93. So it's 30th anniversary of the Clipper chip. Happy Clipper anniversary. Right? So this was a device that would secure or not a live phone call. I mean, actual phone call with phones connected to the wall. The Clipper encryption would sit between the phone and the handset. Remember handsets?
Right.
That shifted in the 2000s. It was about, but what was it about? Because there you had, I'm blanking what they were. They were messaging services, and then the back door was in the messaging system somehow.
Like AOL Instant Messaging back in the day?
I forget what it was, right? 2010s was, can we break into the phone? Remember, there was that terrorist who died
San
in
Bernardino.
the phone. This decade, suddenly the problem is CSAM, which is child abuse material. So, we thought terrorists would be a sexy reason that would get people to go along. Now think of the children. It's all the same, and the tactics change. They move from phones, they move to direct messages, they move to email systems. Now you're right, it's more about client-side scanning versus scanning in the network. It's all the same thing in the end, right? It is a monitor between you and I that looks at the plain text, makes decisions about it, and reports what we're doing to the authorities if it doesn't like what we're doing. And you could put that monitor in different places. You could put it in the middle, in case you had to break the encryption. You could put it at the end before encryption happens. But it's still the same thing. And the threats and the risks don't change much based on how you move it.
Yeah.
So it does feel like we're fighting the same battles.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, when I think about my phone, just the iPhone, and as long as that is in the pocket of every single elected official and head of state and law enforcement officer and judge and nuclear power plant operator and CEO, that needs to be as secure as possible.
Yeah, I don't get why that doesn't.
And anything that breaks it is bad for us.
Right. Yeah, they're expecting that their devices won't be subject to the same thing. That always kills me.
But that's always the belief, right? That we can make an access mechanism that only the good guys get to use.
Yeah. Right.
And we've been saying for 30 years now that doesn't exist, right? I can't create a technical mechanism that operates differently depending on the morality of the person who's using it.
Right. A few weeks back, there was a rather astounding attack on Hezbollah and in Lebanon involving exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. And this really kind of seemed like a watershed moment for warfare. And while it wasn't really a cyber attack, it certainly highlighted how devastating supply chain attacks can be. So what should we broadly be learning from this incident? And then realistically speaking, how do we mitigate the risk to supply chain attacks and be more resilient maybe
Wow, we can't. I wrote a piece in New York Times about this and laid out sort of the history that went into this attack. It didn't come out of nowhere. We've Israel has twice before that we know of assassinated individuals through explosives in a phone. There it was very targeted, and if you think about it, it's actually a really good operation. I mean, what you want is to minimize collateral damage. If you put explosives in a phone, you call the person, they put the phone next to their brain, they speak, in which case you know it's them and not somebody else, and then you push boom. I mean, we can talk about the politics of assassination, but as assassinations go, that's pretty good, right? You're minimizing collateral damage. We have seen attacks where the NSA has intercepted Cisco routers and inserted backdoors in them. Right? That was part of a Snowden document. Remember, the FBI created an entire fake secure phone company.
Yes.
Right? And sold phones to criminals, not to murder them, but to arrest them. So the whole fake front company isn't even new. All the pieces were there. Israel put them together in this way, and still the one thing we don't know is whether explosives put in the phone or was the battery just somehow set to run away and explode. My guess is explosive, that the battery just couldn't make a big enough boom.
Yeah, that's what I've read too.
I am surprised that we haven't seen a takedown of one of the devices that fizzled. Presumably they didn't all go off, that something fizzled. So I'm a little surprised there. But my guess is it was explosives. And we know that Israel basically set up a fake company in Hungary sourcing pagers from Taiwan, which they modified and sold to Hezbollah. We don't know the supply chain of the walkie-talkies. Yeah. I haven't seen anything about that.
Yeah, me either.
I think this is a big deal. If nothing else, then it sort of shows the world that this is doable. And it is now something that has been done, which means it'll be done again, right? If there's a line to be crossed, the line has been crossed. I think you're right. It really shows the dangers of supply chain. Again, nothing new, right? I mean, how many years have we been talking about the security risks of Chinese networking equipment?
Yeah.
It's been over a decade.
And we tried to ban Huawei, and we've tried to do some things. But...
Right, and try to is the operative word here, because this isn't the 1980s anymore. Our supply chains are deeply, irrevocably international. You can't make a U.S.-only iPhone.
Right.
It would cost 10 times as much. No one would buy it. And even worse, we don't have the capability anymore.
Right.
That's all been outsourced. We could talk again about the motivations of capitalism to make things as cheap and as fragile as possible. So we have very tight supply chains always going to the cheapest place, which does make vulnerabilities. Now, I mean, I don't expect China to booby trap Huawei network equipment so it explodes.
Right.
But I do expect them to booby trap it so it shuts down.
Or maybe remote surveillance. Yeah, but one of those two. Probably.
Remote surveillance, I think, is harder. I mean, if you're running a network and a copy of everything goes to Beijing, you're going to notice pretty soon. But if there's a command in there that says, if you receive this complex packet, degrade by 50%, you'll never notice it. And China's never going to use it unless they're at the brink of war.
Is there any sort of mutually assured destruction scenario here? Do we have similar things hanging over their heads too? Or?
God, I hope so. And this is certainly, I think, what we think is happening in critical infrastructure. That China and Russia are in our power plants, but we're in their power plants as well. So nobody's going to do anything. Is it the same way in networking and other critical infrastructure? Don't know.
Yeah.
But that's a terribly unstable situation. Because it only works if they know we can do it. I mean, if you think about nuclear deterrence, was based on the fact that there was no secrecy. You have to know exactly what the other side has in order to be deterred. If you're not sure and you have to guess, that's less stable.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of secrecy in this. Oh, well, maybe there isn't. Maybe at like the NSA level, they're trading screenshots of their access
right.
all the time to prove they're in. Yeah, I'm in your network. I don't know. We don't know. So I don't like sort of mutual offense as a deterrence, but that might be all we have.
All right, so we can't finish without talking about AI, and you've written a lot of things recently about this. So you write some interesting ideas about how the technology has the potential for disrupting democracy. I mean, we've talked a lot about people losing jobs, and and we have, I guess, talked about mis and disinformation, which would be part of what you're talking about. But you mentioned that, and this is something that I think doesn't get enough attention, that AI introduces not just a difference in degree, but a difference in kind. Like it's scope, it's sophistication, and speed, and things that make it a different thing fundamentally than a human doing this. So the way AI approaches the fundamental nature of tasks, it's transformational rather than just like an optimization. So talk a little bit about some of the essays you've written recently about how AI could disrupt our democracy, and there are some other concerning ways that it might influence law enforcement, politics, lawmaking. This sounded almost like your next book, actually.
So it is my next book, but the
okay.
difference is that I'm more optimistic than pessimistic.
Okay.
You use the word disrupt. I use the word affect. And there's good and bad. And we can talk about misinformation and fake news. Everyone talks about that. I don't think that's very interesting, actually. I think there's a lot of places where AI can make a huge difference in democracy for the better, if we let it. And we might not, right? It might be like another case of we can't have nice things. So you're right about AI being potentially transformational. And I think of AI changing things across 4 dimensions. I'm going to say it right: speed, scale, scope, and sophistication. Right? So, the problem with AI's trading stocks is not that they're better at it, just that they're faster at it. Right? High-speed trading is the thing, and high-speed trading has changed the nature of trading. Right? The difference in speed made something completely different. And similarly, AI's playing Go has changed the nature of the game. Humans are learning new strategy from the computers.
Yeah.
So what I'm writing about, what I'm thinking about, is how AI will change democracy across 5 different dimensions. I think about politics. I think about legislating, bureaucracy, the legal system, and finally citizen engagement. So those 5 areas.
Okay.
And in all of them, I see both risks and promises. It's not all bad. It's not all good. So, AI as assistive tech is great. AIs can help write laws. AIs can help write laws that are more complete, that have fewer loopholes. We lost the Chevron deference in the United States, so Congress is going to be required to write much more complex law. AI can help with that. And there's a lot of promise here. And it's not going to be AIs are now legislating. AIs will become legislative assistants, just like humans are. I mean, when a congressperson introduces a bill, they didn't write it, right? Somebody else wrote it.
Yeah, for lucky it was a staffer. For not lucky it was a lobbyist.
Well, right. Well, lucky, but it was a human.
Yeah.
You can imagine the human turning to an AI and saying, "Write me a bill on this. Make sure it doesn't intersect with these things." The one example I know, and this is last year, Brazil, Puerto Alegre is the city, has the first law written entirely by AI. It was about water meters, so nothing exciting here. Although, water meters matter.
Seems like a safe place to start.
And the human legislator wanted a bill, turned to a chatbot, and gave it a prompt. It produced a bill. The human legislator looked at it and said, "Yeah, that looks good." Submitted it into the legislature. The different legislators debated and voted. I don't know what they do in Puerto Alegre, Brazil. Presumably they have their process.
Yeah.
And it passed, unchanged. And then he said, "Hey, look, the AI wrote this." But that's exactly what we want, right? The AI does the drudgery work of writing the thing. The humans review it. The humans discuss it. The humans debate it. The humans vote on it. And it becomes law. That's great. And if that makes people better legislators, I'm all for it. Take another example. We can imagine AIs adjudicating disputes. So not in a courtroom, although there's a lot of uses of AI in courtrooms, and I think we can think about those. But you can certainly imagine, just as two people enter into binding arbitration agreements, right? If you get into a contract with somebody, there might be a clause saying you agree to binding arbitration. Basically, what that means is we agree that if we disagree, we're not going to sue each other because that's expensive. We're going to go to this, private arbitrator, which is a lot cheaper, and then
Right.
get our dispute resolved.
Right.
You can imagine two people saying, tomorrow, we're going to just use the AI, right? We're going to, it's even cheaper than the service. we just ask the AI gives us a ruling.
Huh.
And that's going to change the nature of disputes. And that's interesting. You can imagine doing it 5 times a day.
What are the chances that AI though is maybe I'm just too jaded, but there's been AI used in determining sentencing guidelines for particular offenders. There have been recidivism, that they're used to judge the likelihood of recidivism.
And they're racist, and they're sexist,
Mhm.
and they're biased. That's right. And we could build AI that's racist and sexist and ageist and ableist and all those things, or we could build better ones. I'm hoping we'll build better ones. And if we do, they will be useful here. Remember, they're replacing humans that are sexist and racist and ableist and ageist and all those things. So I just got to be better than the people, which are pretty lousy. I think there's promise here. I mean, we might not do it, but we could do it.
So what about as citizens? Do you foresee us as citizens using AI as tools? Like I could see using it to help me interpret law. Let's say I've been charged with something, and yes, I'll have a lawyer, but it would also be nice if I could have an AI that would kind of run through the laws and kind of dumb them down for me so I understand what they mean.
And this is AI. I think there's a lot of promise here. So yes, I mean, AI as explainer is a really powerful use case. Whether it's explaining, particle physics to you, or explaining it to you saying a certain law, or explaining the nuances of a bill or an election or something that you might want to support or not support. I think there's a lot of power here in educating and explaining. And there, of course, are people going to use it? I mean, I can't solve the people don't care problem, but I can solve the we don't have enough explainers. In a lot of the use cases, it's not AI versus human, it's AI versus nobody, because we don't have enough humans. I'd rather have an AI-assisted public defender than an overworked, not very good human public defender, right? If that's my choice. I mean, that might not be my choice, right? I might get stuck with a bad AI or a bad human, in which case, I think there's a lot of value in AIs helping us navigate bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Here again, if you are wealthy, you can hire someone to help you through immigration court or housing court, or so any of those things where having advocate matters. If an AI can give that advocacy to more people, that's great. It'd be even better to give every one of those people a human advocate, but that isn't an option. Now, again, they make mistakes, but of course so do humans. And now the question is, do they make the same kind of mistakes? How are the mistakes corrected? What are the mechanisms for knowing the mistakes have been made? Are they systemic? I mean, racism is a mistake, but it's a systemic mistake, and that makes it a different kind of mistake. And that's important.
So, all right, last question. Should there be any guardrails on AI, either technically or imposed by regulation? Is there an obvious danger to AI that we should be curbing or not?
Well, the first one is we talked about the bias. I mean, the bias is incredibly damaging, and I hope existing laws work. I mean, just like you can't have a bank that has a desperate loan requirements for different genders. That if the AI does that, that's just as bad. So yes, I mean, we need to deal with the fact that these things are biased in ways that are illegal against protected classes. I mean, 100%. And those are harms that are happening today. And
is that a matter of the AI though, or just is it garbage in, garbage out? Is it because we're feeding it biased information?
But why should I care? Is the bank racist because it's inherently racist because it has garbage data? We don't care. The law doesn't care. The law just says you can't be racist. And this is important. We don't need an explanation. We just need it not to do it anymore. So yes, I think we need really good rules, and that's really about the use of it. And where the liability falls, I'm not sure it matters. It eventually will flow up to the makers of the systems. So I do want regulations there. I mean, definitely regulations about use of it. Again, I don't know if they should be AI specific.
What about just
And if
basic
you're
transparency?
using an assistive tool, right, transparency is important. But
like
if
this
you
was
use
generated by AI.
I mean, this conversation, 100%. I'm not here.
You know what I mean? They've talked about watermarking and things, but I mean, just from if you require, you say, oh, if you generate this substantially with AI, then you should somehow label it as such.
That'd be nice, but I wish we had that rule with Photoshop. So last year, I think, maybe a year before, I'm in Europe, and I'm having watching the television, and it's an ad for a hair care product. And on the screen, it says, model has extra hair extension, simulated hair. I forget the phrase they used.
Okay.
This is not AI, but that was a disclosure. What you're seeing isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not an AI problem. I would like those disclosures in general. And I notice that a lot of what we think of as AI problems and AI solutions, I want to go up a level and have the solution in the general case. I mean, I don't care if your fake political ad was created by AI or a bunch of actors on a soundstage. It doesn't matter. It's a fake ad. And AI doesn't make a difference here. AI makes it easier.
Yeah.
But AI is not the problem. Right? So just like that model, it has hair extensions, making untrue implications about the hair care product. That country required disclosure. That was fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Last question. This is here's your softball. How are things going at Interrupt? Is the Solid protocol gaining any traction? And then what's next for you? Is your next book sounds like it's going to be about AI?
So Interrupt is going well. We realized that pods are wallets. That the notion of a pod, personal online data store, is really a wallet. And wallets are not the same as like a Dropbox, because wallets have data in it that you want to share under certain circumstances. Right? You carry a wallet with you because the thing in it you're going to need to pull it out and do something with it, show it to somebody, write on it, right? Whatever the thing is, give it, get it. And that is a better metaphor. And that metaphor change has been really powerful. And now we are thinking in terms of data wallets, which are not, you put your driver's license and you take it out. They're way more complex of when you want to share data, how permissions work, how data flows, what the auditing is like, and sort of all the things you might want. And then when you reimagine a wallet as sort of an infinitely sized space of data, not to say about your data that you control, that you want to control who else it goes to under what circumstances, you have some very powerful capabilities. So that's where we are in that right now.
Okay.
And it's kind of exciting because, it's again, sort of nothing changed and everything changed, which is sort of weird. You mentioned my next book.
Yes.
I'm writing a book on AI and democracy, publishing about a year from now.
Okay.
Turns out that you should never write books to be published in election years because no one will read them. And, I can't write a book about democracy and not include the 2024 election. So publishing in spring of next year, the timing didn't work out. So next fall is really the next window. And it's those 5 areas I talked about. I talk about pluses and minuses. I am largely optimistic, unlike lots of people.
Yeah. All right, Bruce, that was great. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. And, look forward to 500. That'll be a big one.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Thanks, Bruce. It's always great talking to Bruce. Like I said, he's a really fun guy. I actually had an opportunity to meet him and have a drink with him up at Harvard last year, I think it was. It was great to finally meet him in person. But he's always just got a really interesting perspective, and I kind of like the way he approaches topics. His books are great. By the way, one of my favorites of his, which I mentioned in the intro for him, was Data and Goliath. It's a really great book on privacy and how all of this data that's being collected on us is really a problem, not just for us, but for society. It's a great book. But most of his books are, but that is my personal favorite and one worth checking out. So I thought it might be interesting to bring up that since we had this interview, the European Union has passed a ruling on software liability, which is a really big deal. I'm not going to get into it too much now, but I definitely will be covering that in next week's news show. Also today, we spent some time talking about election security, and that is a really important topic, and not just the security of the systems themselves, but our trust in the election process here in the U.S. and really around the world. But we've got the big election here coming up in the U.S. very shortly. And so I did a great interview with Ben Adida last December, I think it was. And I'll put a link to this one in the show notes. If you're at all concerned about this upcoming election, the security and our trust in elections, that is a great episode to listen to because Ben is an absolute expert in election software and security, and you should definitely check that out. I also did an interview a while back with Hari Hursty, who runs the voting village, the voting hacking village at DEF CON a while back too. I'll put a link to that one in the show notes too. That's another really interesting episode if you're curious about the security of elections. But I will just quickly say, kind of a TLDR version of these things is, we do know how to do elections right. And in most places around the U.S., we actually are doing them right. And doing them right certainly means paper ballots, voter verifiable paper ballots. And we want risk limiting audits. And those don't happen enough yet, but they're starting to happen. We need voting systems that are open and available for security researchers to study and vet and make sure that they're secure. That we're not quite there yet, but that's part of what Ben Adida is doing. And there are vulnerabilities in some of these systems. But the key takeaway, though, is despite that fact, we really don't have any direct evidence of that sort of tampering in our elections. Chris Krebs was right. The 2020 election was very secure. It could not have been, but the fact is it was. Anyway, if you find that as fascinating as I do and are concerned about that as much as I do, check the links in the show notes to go back and check out those episodes because they're really good at getting into some of those details. Also, Bruce mentioned that New York Times article about the pager bombs. That is in the show notes. Bruce referenced that FBI secure phone company. That company was called Anom. There's a great book written about that, and I interviewed the author, Joseph Cox, last summer. That's another great podcast to go back and check out, and another great book to read, by the way. It reads like a thriller. That's another great one to check out. So those links are in the show notes. Definitely check that out. So one of the perks for my patrons is they get bonus podcast content, and that comes out on Thursdays. So this Thursday, I asked Bruce some more questions about... I tried to pin him down on the origin of his Friday Squid blog, where he dutifully posts a story somehow related to squid every Friday. You would think that would have nothing to do with security blog, and most of the times it doesn't. So I asked him about the origins of that. I asked Bruce what he does for fun, what his hobbies are outside of cryptography. We talk about the problem of bureaucracy in the U.S. government around cybersecurity, and whether we blame victims of cyber attacks more than we maybe should be blaming the product makers. So anyway, that is the bonus content that my patrons will be getting on Thursday. Okay, so I'm guessing that because this is a big milestone, that there are probably a lot of first-time listeners to my podcast listening today. So this podcast is really just part of a whole bunch of stuff that I do. And so if you'll, again, indulge me, I just want to real quick kind of list some of the other things that you might be interested in if you like this show. First of all, if you've never listened to the podcast, definitely go back and listen to some past ones. I've interviewed some really cool people, amazing people over the years for not that huge of a podcast. I've managed to land some great interviews. I've talked to Cory Doctorow, Andy N, who's the CEO of Proton. I've talked to Phil Zimmerman a couple times. He was the creator of PGP. He's very interesting. Kashmir Hill, famous journalist and author. A lot of OG hackers, people from The Loft and the Cult of the Dead Cow. Troy Hunt, the guy who runs Have I Been Pwned. Josh Corman, Jeff Moss. Lots of amazing people. So if you enjoyed this interview with Bruce, definitely go back and look at some past episodes. There's some great stuff back there. And then all of this started because I wrote a book about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago now, called Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, a step-by-step guide to computer security and privacy for non-techies. It's kind of like a, for dummies kind of a thing. And it's now in its 5th edition. Like I try to update it periodically because it's got a lot of screenshots and step-by-step instructions for doing these things, which unfortunately for me change all the time. So I need to keep the book up to date. And over the years, I've added a lot of other new anecdotes and stories, and I've really expanded the privacy aspects, for example. I'm really proud of this book. It's come a long way. It's like 600 pages long now. Now, a lot of that's because there's a lot of screenshots in it, so there's a lot of pictures. But there's like over 200 tips in there. It's really grown. And all these are, actionable advice to protect your devices and data. So, if you might want to check out the book, even if you kind of know this stuff already, even if you're already knowledgeable, the other kind of aspect for this book, and the reasons I wrote it for myself, was I get a lot of these kind of questions. I'm a software engineer. All my family knows that. And so I would get questions from people about, do I have a virus? Should I use antivirus? How do I, protect my data? And so, you know what? I wrote this book as somewhere I could just say, here, just start by reading that and then ask me, and then come back to me with questions. So it's kind of an easy button thing for helping other people. And then I got the bright idea a few years back to create a little coupon book, like those coupon books you get your parents when you don't have any money, so you offer to do chores or fun things for them. I figured there's also a room for people to help other people with their security and privacy stuff. So I've actually created a free PDF download of some coupons that you could give, put in people's stockings or whatever, where you could help other people improve their security and privacy, because that's the whole point of all this stuff. There's so much low-hanging fruit. There are so many simple things we all can and should be doing that would help all of us, like through herd immunity. I mean, the more people do these things, the better off we all are, even for some of us that don't do these things. That's like the underlying thing with all this stuff. So anyway, if you think that might be a fun gift that you might want to give give the gift of your time, you could go and download and print off some of these coupons and give them away for Christmas or whatever. So I also have a newsletter and a blog, and that comes out every 2 weeks. And that usually corresponds with the tip of the week I give in my podcasts, but they're all actionable things. They're all usually related to something that recently happened. And that leads me to, give you a tip on how to better protect your data and your devices. So you could just go back and read the blog, in which you can go, and if you go to my website, that's my blog, you can go back and look at all the old articles. But if you sign up for the newsletter, not only do you get them automatically sent to your inbox, but you also get, I've got a little booklet with my top 5 tips in it. You'll get that. And you'll get a preview of the first couple chapters of my book as well. So that might be a reason to sign up for the newsletter. And then finally, to support all of this stuff, because, this does take time and effort and money to run some of this stuff, I have a wonderful group of patrons on Patreon. But being a patron also has some, I think, really cool perks. Including, like I just talked about, there's bonus podcast material. So on interview weeks, I do bonus Q&A with my interview guest. And then for some of my higher level patrons on the off week, when I do a news show, I also have this other kind of bonus podcast called Merlin's Musings, where I kind of talk about all sorts of stuff. Some of them are very technical, some of them are personal. But there's a lot of great bonus podcast material. And of course, if you sign up as a patron now, you'll get access to all the previous stuff. So you'll immediately get, oh gosh, there's a lot. There's well over 100 episodes of private podcast stuff. I also have a private Discord server where you can chat with me and several other of my very smart and helpful patrons. We have an InfoSec book club if you're interested, and I stay away from the dry technical stuff and try to find fun stuff. But we read a book every couple months. And for my patrons, I often give a lot of, background stuff, behind the scenes stuff, and give them heads up on stuff coming down the pike. And often I even, put it out to my patrons like, hey, is there anybody you think I should interview? Or, hey, I'm going to be interviewing this person. What kind of questions should I ask? So, it's an access thing. You can get some access directly to me if that is something you would find interesting. So there's plenty of other stuff too. If you go to my website, there's a support button there. There's a lot of fun things there, including merchandise and plenty of other stuff and other ways that you can help me spread the word. So thanks for indulging me and letting me toot my own horn a little bit. But I figure there's going to be some new people listening to the podcast that probably have no idea that stuff exists. So I honestly don't talk about that stuff as much as I probably should anyway. So now would be a good time to do that. So thank you again for indulging me there. Okay, one last thing. If you happen to live near or around Atlanta, Georgia, I will be giving a talk with Privacy for Cars' Andrea Amico at the Hacker Halted conference this week. It'll be on Halloween Day, 2:55 p.m., I think is when our talk is on Halloween Day. I don't know what it costs to get in, honestly, but I don't think it's that much. But if you're interested and you're in the area, come on down and you can see me and you can stop by after the talk and say hey. And as always, there's a link in the show notes with more information. Definitely check the show notes. There's always good stuff there. All right. Coming up, I've got interviews with Carissa Veliz, author of Privacy is Power, and Stacey Higginbotham. We'll be talking about IoT security and a lot more stuff coming down the pike, including my best and worst gift guide that'll be coming out soon. Lots of great stuff. So if you haven't subscribed, now would be a good time to do so. Okay, that'll do it. I'll shut up now. Thanks, everybody. It's been an amazing 400 episodes, and I'm looking forward to many more. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.